Welcome back. This is a full lecture on the theology of dating, the partial shadow of marriage. Now, let's get to the really important part, perhaps the most essential part of this lecture. How can we define love? This question evokes varying answers for so many people regardless of religion. Philosophers try to prove what love is with several philosophical concepts. Biologists will explain love as a physical response to hormone secretion. However, psychologists will describe it as emotional intimacy with each other, usually occurring either unconsciously or consciously. That shows it is impossible to define what love is in one sentence. How would you like to define love if you are listening to this lecture? Each person will respond differently, and my answer may be one of many sentences. So rather than define love, we describe some aspects of it in our own language. Nevertheless, I try to make a seemingly reckless attempt. It's impossible to define love in one sentence, so let's look at it from several aspects. We will look at how the Bible describes love because we have to think depending on the complete revelation of the Bible. The greatest definition of love is found in 1 John chapter 4, verse 7 through 10. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Everyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. In this, the love of God was made manifest among us, that God sent His only Son into the world so that we might live through Him. In this is love, not that we have loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Pay special attention to the second half of verse 8. Because God is love. As the apostle of love, John asserts God Himself is love. This should be the starting point for everything that defines love. Love is not a conceptual dimension separate from a relational one, but must have a being who reveals love rationally. So love must be defined primarily in terms of being because God Himself is love. Love looks like a noun, but it's always a verb. There can be no love that is fixed on itself or it does not make a change. Thus, love belongs to the realm of dynamic existence and cannot simply be defined in our finite language because God Himself is love. For this reason, the Apostle John adds an explanation after he declares, because God is love. Our finite reason cannot properly understand the resonance of infinite being implied in this short sentence. The apostle further explains the love by saying, in this, the love of God was made manifest among us, or in this is love. Fallen man cannot comprehend such love in a short, declarative sentence, God is love. So John tells us how that love was actually manifested in a verb. He also tells us in dynamic detail why that love exists. What does it mean to say that love belongs to God and that God Himself is love? As we see in verses 9 through 10, God sent His only Son into the world to save us through Him. And it was not that we have loved God, but that God loved us and sent His Son as propitiation for our sins. Indeed, there is no greater portrayal of love in the world than that. The apostle's statement is the sum total of all love in the world, that supremacy of love that humans can recognize it. It is life itself that makes the dead heart of a sinner beat. I hope that Christian young adults will be able to engrave the content of this supreme love into their beings. And I wish that the emotional intimacy to sprout between the opposite sexes can develop on the basis of this love. We must remember that apart from this love which forms a special relationship with us, every single moment of our life cannot be meaningful. Let us relate verses 7 through 8 to the statement that love should be relational. For love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God, Anyone who does not love does not know God, because God is love. As you can see, whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. It means that since love belongs to God, the source of love is God. Also, it means that the being of the one who loves cannot be separated from God himself. Therefore, love must necessarily be relational and accompany the being that causes the relation. It is blasphemy to try to explain love only conceptually. Again, we get to the second half of verse 8, because God is love. This is the conclusion of all verses 7 and 8. The second half of verse 7 and the first half of verse 8 is in fact the reverse of the same content. Whoever loves has been born of God and knows God, second half of verse 7, and therefore anyone who does not love does not know God, first half of verse 8. Taken together, these parts mean that we cannot love without knowing Him. Why? Because God is love. Now we know that exactly the starting point of all love. Only those who know who God is and what He has done for us can speak of love. Because love belongs to God and God Himself is love, all our love from God and knowing God must be based on our relationship with God. I will constantly remind you of that when discussing love from now on. Let's add this sentence and move on to the next one. Because God Himself is love, love must first be defined existentially. Now we know that when we define love as being, love is God, it is simply a reversed expression of the phrase God is love, not love is the same with God. C.S. Lewis warns that when the truth that God is love is overturned and love becomes God, it becomes the demon. If you just say love is God and leave it there, this evokes a lot of questions, especially for young people. It doesn't mean that the existential definition of love is insufficient, but it means that the definition should be paraphrased to appeal to five senses of dating people. We can define love in the formal aspect as well as the existential aspect. In this case, the form refers to the components that make up love. But this is by no means referring to the components that make up God. When we say love is God, love refers to the very existence of God. And this is why this statement is called the existential definition of love. This time I would like to argue the definition of love in another dimension. This is the former aspect of love that I talked about a while ago. Love at this point refers to what is commonly referred to as a conceptual love. Earlier I asserted that any attempt to explain love only conceptually is an insult to love. That refers to a conceptual love which we discuss by excluding the essence and existence of love. I refer to the kind of love as blasphemy, which was only conceptually and abstractly discussed, excluding our relations with God, which is the substance of love. Psychologists excel at that kind of research. They come up with many theories about love. It is a crucial weak point not to mention the substance of love, the triune God, but we can gain some insight into conceptual love from them. For example, Robert J. Sternberg asserts that the three components of love are intimacy, passion, and commitment. When these three form an equilateral triangle, he analyzes it as perfect love. His triangle theory of love is still frequently cited in general science. However, it is necessary to simplify the components of love even more and connect it with existential love. The theory of love that ends up as a concept is just theory. Therefore, the conceptual love discussed here already premises existential love because the forms of conceptual love are based on existential love. From now on, you will gradually understand what this means. I've been teaching for over 10 years on dating, marriage, and the kingdom of God in the ministry field. Retrospectively, I have been giving lectures for a much longer time before starting the path of ministry. In every lecture, I ask young people to define what love is in one word. They start pouring out the concepts of love they want to talk about the most. In general, the answers go like this. Love is a dedication to him, her. Love is that I sacrifice my everything for him, her. Love is to be patient. Love is to be together to the end. Love is that I give up my time when he, she wants it. After that, I ask another question. Answer honestly about your symptoms of love. They usually answer like these. When I fall in love, I miss him, her. When I fall in love, I remember him, her all day long. When I love, my heart beats and gets excited. The more I love, the more I want to have physical contact. Falling in love is overflowing with happiness. A close look reveals something interesting. When asked to say what love is, they almost always refer to love's volitional, that is, will-related side. The concepts of dedicating, sacrificing, being patient, being together to the end, and giving up are all within the realm of the will. On the other hand, when asked to describe symptoms of love, they almost always refer to the emotional side of love. The concept of missing, remembering, being excited, wanting physical contact, and overflowing with happiness are all within the realm of emotion. This phenomenon tells us that conceptual love cannot be defined in one form or element. Some lecturers said love is will, not emotion, but I can't agree with that. In my view, conceptual love involves both will and emotion, and we who experience love are already aware of both. Therefore, it is completely undesirable to teach that love is only a will or claim love only as an emotion. The forms that make up love include both will and emotion. In other words, the two components that make up conceptual love are will and emotion. Now we have to decide how to understand these two things. If love is neither a will nor an emotion alone, we have to figure out how these two components interact to form whole love. Let's add this sentence and move on to the next one. In terms of formality, love is an operation of the will accompanied by emotion. Now this part is also on the continuum of how can we define love. Let us recall the last sentence of what we have just read. Love is an operation of the will accompanied by emotion. This is my conclusion when defining love in terms of formality. It is essential to understand both will and emotion regarding love. How to understand these two factors determines how to love. Some people think of love as a purely emotional component, and some even say that all you need for dating is sensitivity and that dating and love are a dynamic wave of emotions. They think that love will sprout only when they are attracted by someone emotionally. For example, when they believe they love someone, their heart should pound and be excited. Such people as them assume him, her to be so. Like themselves, they say that he, she has to have emotion of love for themselves, which is evidence that he, she loves them. They believe that all standards of love are in each other's emotional state. How do people who believe in the emotional state as love usually have date? They are going to put all of their energy into moving him, her in any way and keeping him, her in an excited emotional state. To instill the emotion of love, they pursue endless special events in their daily life. Shamefully, I'm very poor in this area. Then, one day, when the emotional state towards each other decreases, they become embarrassed of themselves. They think that their love for him or her has diminished or even no longer exists. The opposite is also true. If they don't feel that he, she loves them, they think that he, she doesn't love them anymore. There was such a couple. After dating for about a month, the brother came and swore they were going to get married. They were filled with emotional love. At that moment, I thought that this couple would not go far. Not long after that, the friend came again and said, "Come to think of it, I guess I didn't love her." Yes, he did love her fully. He had such a catastrophe because he put his stand-up love on his emotional state. The emotion of love disappeared at some point and he felt embarrassed of himself. According to my analysis of the counseling cases, couples dating for the first time often find themselves in this kind of situation. So, wouldn't the emotional state matter when we love and date? They matter. Naturally, when we fall in passionate love with each other, we are filled with excitement. But we need to know exactly the emotional feeling of love that arises cannot continue in the same state. Even if the emotional state of love is full, there comes a point when the state disappears as time goes by. After that, for some reason, it soars again to a state similar to the beginning. That is, the emotion of love is variable. Biologists explain the emotion of love as hormone secretion. When a man and woman fall in love, the brain becomes extremely active, releasing several hormones. In general, dopamine, phenylethylamine, oxytocin, and endorphins are hormones involved in love. That's why these four are called love hormones. Of these, oxytocin is more often referred to as the love hormone because it stimulates the craving for intense physical intimacy. The secretion of these hormones determines the emotion of love during dating. However, the problem is that the hormone secretion state cannot continue to peak. Although there are slight differences among researchers, it is generally said that the hormone secretion decreases rapidly after 6 months. Interestingly, an actual experiment to analyze the brains of couples in love and produced the same result. Usually after 18 through 30 months, the hormonal influence on the same lover almost disappears. From this moment on, the rose-colored glasses come off. In the past, while conducting couples counseling for a long time, I discovered an interesting fact. The time was concentrated between about 6 months and 1 year in which they started to fight or broke up. Couples dating for the first time showed such a tendency, and I later found out that it almost coincided with the hormonal state that starts when falling in love. It is easy to find statistics that the average dating period of young people is between 6 months and 1 year. We can graph these facts as follows. Taken together, many couples set the standards for loving each other on the emotional state due to hormone secretion. It is natural to want to feel the emotion of passionate love because they are young. But we have to get away from nature to believe that emotion itself is love. Otherwise, the loved one will constantly change according to the secretion of our hormones. While emotion is a required component of love, we must remember that emotion itself is not love. While many people believe that love is purely an emotion, surprisingly, many think of love only as will. The young people in the church show such a tendency rather than those of the world. It may be a case of extreme bias while trying to overcome the harm of believing that love is an emotional state, or it may be because the body has weakness that does not secrete love hormones well. In this section, I would like to examine the case where love is thought of only as will. How does someone love who believes love is a will? You can get hints from the answers from the actual lectures I mentioned earlier. People usually answer the question, what is love, in terms of dedication, sacrifice, patience, and willingness to give up. These are all answers that emphasize the volitional, will-related side. Interestingly, they answer the symptoms of love: missing, remembering, excited, wanting physical contact, and overflowing with happiness. These are all aspects related to love's emotional side. As previously argued, both of these sides are included in conceptual love. In particular, young Christian people consider love as a volitional side because they are usually exposed to such a content. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is called the love chapter, emphasized love's volitional side very much. The volitional side of love is very prominent, but we must not think of love as only will. Like in the past, the more emotionally blunt and more rational they are, the stronger they tend to think of love as will. They try to avoid emotional turbulence when young men and women fall in love. One of the reasons for thinking like that is the atmosphere in the church where the emotional love is considered a sin. But emotion naturally comes out between lovers when dating. Of course, it seems that the atmosphere has changed a lot these days. Many churches offer high-quality education in this area by offering dating courses for middle and high school students and young adults. Although those are often limited to a developmental psychological diagnosis dealing with natural emotions of men and women in the image of God is very positive. However, it was socially taboo to express emotions between the opposite sexes in a generation older than me. In particular, there was an atmosphere of sacrilege in the church, which is the testimony I heard from my mother-in-law, a senior in the faith. Under these circumstances, Christians are not good at analyzing and expressing the emotion of love. Even some people who are much younger than I often criticize my dating lectures as impure. For one reason or another, many people think that love is only a will. The way that love is somewhat artificial and obsessive, rather than his, her, emotion and mind, the cause and purpose of dating are unwittingly first and foremost. That is, we should not be swayed by mere emotions when it comes to dating and marriage. They try to understand love only as a dedication, patient, continuous sacrifice, and giving up of what is theirs. They don't really care about each other's emotions and minds in the process. In adolescence, this tendency is especially seen in men rather than women. When I was in college, I read The Art of Loving by Eric Fromm, a social psychologist. I've been interested in serious dating and love since my teenage years, so I could feel the novelty throughout reading his book. It was like cold water in summer to me, who tabooed emotional turbulence during dating. Hormonal emotion was not crucial in defining and analyzing love. Actually, he said, to love somebody is not just a strong feeling. His way of portraying love as an art was marvelous to me at the time. Like acquiring skills in music, painting, or architecture, love should be approached as a skill, and it is an approach that sounds worrying to modern people who want to reckon love as a strong emotion. I fully sympathize with Fromm's intentions, but it's hard to accept his view fully. This is because the turbulent emotional state of love has profound effect on actual dating or marriage. We should not blindly proclaim that love is a volitional skill, but we should make a biblical diagnosis and suggest alternative to such a part. We need to give a balanced perspective to those who taboo the emotion of love and believe love is the same as will. Think about it. What would happen if lovers had no emotional response to the fact that they loved and treated each other only with skill? Do you want to date or have a married life with thorough self-control and volitional skills without reacting volitionally to such intense emotions? From my point of view, who is gradually becoming an emotional man, it seems terrifying to think about it. Okay, it's time to wrap up the class today. See you next.